When Princess Diana died in 1997, the world mourned a global icon. She wasn't just royalty, she was compassion in motion. The people's princess, a mother, a humanitarian, a woman who, even after divorce and public scrutiny, never stopped putting her children first. But nearly 3 decades later, one detail about her estate continues to shock people. Princess Diana's fortune, worth millions, ultimately went to just one person, and when people learn why, it completely reframes the story they thought they knew. At the time of her passing, Diana had carefully structured her will. She made provisions. She thought ahead. She considered not only wealth, but protection, stability, legacy. Yet what happened in the years that followed wasn't as simple as headlines suggested. While the public assumed everything was divided in obvious ways, the legal and emotional reality was far more layered. Adjustments were made, timelines shifted, and eventually control of her estate passed fully into the hands of one individual. But this wasn't favoritism. It wasn't conflict. It was intention. The reason behind that decision speaks directly to who Diana was in her final years: fiercely protective, deeply maternal, and profoundly aware of the pressures her children would face inside the monarchy. Understanding why her estate consolidated the way it did reveals something powerful about Diana's priorities. It shows that even in death, she was thinking strategically, not about status, but about safeguarding her legacy through the person she believed could carry it responsibly. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about trust, about motherhood, and about a final decision that says more about Princess Diana than any royal headline ever could. When Princess Diana rewrote her will in the final years of her life, she wasn't thinking like a royal, she was thinking like a mother. By then, Diana had learned the hard way that life inside the monarchy was rarely straightforward. She had lived through public betrayal, relentless media pressure, and the painful realization that tradition often outweighed personal well-being. And above all else, she had watched how deeply that world would shape the lives of her 2 young sons. That understanding guided every decision she made. At the time of her death in 1997, Diana's estate was valued at roughly £21 million. To the public, it seemed obvious how that money would be handled: divided evenly, distributed cleanly, managed quietly. But Diana never believed in clean solutions when it came to protecting her children. Her will reflected that. She left her estate in trust for her sons, with specific instructions that delayed full access until they reached maturity. She appointed trusted executors. She set conditions. She planned for a future where her boys would grow up under unimaginable scrutiny, and she wanted safeguards in place long after she was gone. What many people didn't realize is that Diana expected change. She knew circumstances would evolve, relationships would shift, pressures would increase, and she trusted that the people she appointed would make decisions based on her original intent, not rigid wording. That's where the story becomes misunderstood. As the years passed, the estate didn't remain static. Funds were managed, assets were consolidated, and eventually, full control passed to just one person. Not because Diana favored one child over the other, but because the structure of the trust required someone to act as the primary steward. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about responsibility. Diana's greatest fear wasn't wealth being divided unfairly. It was wealth being misused, weaponized, or turned into a burden. She had seen firsthand how money and titles could isolate rather than protect. Her estate wasn't meant to create privilege. It was meant to create stability. Those close to her understood that she trusted maturity over equality. She believed that, at certain moments, one person might be better positioned to protect what mattered, not just money, but memory, reputation, purpose, the charitable causes she cared about deeply. And so, over time, the estate's structure reflected that belief. To outsiders, it looked shocking. To those who understood Diana, it made perfect sense. She wasn't dividing assets like a monarch dividing territory. She was thinking like a mother who knew her children would grow into very different roles, with different pressures, different freedoms, and different expectations. One would live closer to the crown, the other would live closer to independence. Diana planned for both. What she couldn't plan for was how much scrutiny that decision would attract decades later. People want fairness to look symmetrical. Diana knew fairness sometimes looks strategic. This first chapter of the estate story isn't about who received what. It's about why Diana refused to leave anything to chance, because in her mind, the most dangerous thing she could leave behind wasn't imbalance. It was vulnerability, and everything she did, even in her will, was designed to prevent that. The moment people learned that Princess Diana's estate eventually came under the control of just one person, the assumptions came fast. Favoritism, conflict, a royal power move. But every one of those assumptions misses the truth. What actually happened wasn't sudden, emotional, or controversial. It was procedural and deeply aligned with how Diana thought about protection, responsibility, and legacy. From the beginning, Diana never intended her estate to be a simple split of money. Her will placed everything into a trust for her two sons, managed by appointed executors. The goal wasn't immediate access. It was time. Time for maturity. Time for perspective. Time for life to shape them before wealth did. As the years passed and both sons reached adulthood, the trust structure evolved. One son's role inside the monarchy came with strict financial frameworks, public funding, and institutional oversight. The other's life unfolded with far more independence and far fewer structural protections. That difference mattered. Diana understood something the public often forgets. Equality doesn't always mean identical treatment. It means meeting people where they are and where they're going. As the estate matured, consolidating control under one steward wasn't about choosing a favorite. It was about choosing stability. One person needed to act as the primary guardian of assets, charitable interests, and long-term decision-making. That role required discretion, continuity, and the ability to operate outside constant institutional influence. In other words, it required freedom. Diana had always been wary of systems that swallowed individuals whole. She lived that reality. She saw how royal machinery could dilute personal intention. Her estate was one of the few things she could design without compromise, and she designed it to remain human, not bureaucratic. Putting control in one set of hands reduced risk. Fewer decision-makers meant fewer conflicts. Clear authority meant less legal vulnerability. Central stewardship meant her wishes stayed intact. And perhaps most importantly, it kept her legacy focused. Diana's estate wasn't just money. It included personal belongings, private letters, charitable interests, and the intangible weight of her name. Mishandling any of it could turn memory into commodity, something she feared deeply. She didn't want her life reduced to assets. She wanted it protected as meaning. Those who were close to her understood that she trusted judgment over symmetry. She believed that one steady guardian was better than divided responsibility, especially when emotions, public scrutiny, and historical pressure were involved. This is where the narrative shifts. The estate didn't go to one person because someone was chosen over another. It consolidated because Diana planned for a future where her sons' lives would not be equal in structure, and she adjusted accordingly. One lived inside tradition. One lived outside it. Diana believed both deserved protection, just in different forms. And time proved her instincts right. The person who assumed primary control did so quietly. No public celebration, no display of entitlement, just responsibility, stewardship, silence, the exact qualities Diana valued most. The public wanted drama. Diana designed for restraint. Understanding this changes everything. It reframes the estate not as a controversial decision, but as a final act of maternal clarity. A woman who had lost control of so much in her life made sure that, in death, at least one thing remained, guided by intention rather than expectation. This wasn't about wealth. It was about safeguarding a story, her story, from being fragmented, politicized, or exploited. And that's why the estate went where it did, not because of power. The story should have ended with clarity, but instead, it spiraled into rumor. From the moment headlines suggested that Princess Diana's estate went to just one person, a narrative took hold, and it refused to let go. It was repeated in tabloids, debated online, and reshaped into something far more dramatic than the truth. The public didn't want explanation. They wanted a reason to be angry. Some framed it as injustice, others as betrayal. Many claimed it proved favoritism or family fracture. And once those ideas took root, they became almost impossible to correct. But the misconception survived not because it was accurate. It survived because it fit a familiar storyline. People have always struggled to accept that Diana could make calm, strategic decisions. The world preferred to see her as emotional, impulsive, tragic. So when faced with a nuanced estate plan, the public flattened it into something simpler, winner and loser. That was the first mistake. The second was ignoring time. Diana's estate didn't go anywhere overnight. It evolved slowly, legally, and deliberately. Trusts matured, roles shifted, responsibilities changed, but the media compressed decades of legal transitions into a single misleading sentence. And that sentence became the myth. One person received control, the other did not. And suddenly, everything else was ignored. What no headline explained was this: control is not the same as ownership. Responsibility is not the same as reward. And silence is not the same as exclusion. The person who became the primary steward didn't receive more love, more value, or more inheritance in any emotional sense. They received obligation, the burden of protecting a legacy under relentless public scrutiny. That distinction mattered deeply to Diana. She understood that her death would not end public consumption of her life. If anything, it would intensify it. Her image, her words, her memory, all of it would become vulnerable. And the worst thing that could happen was fragmentation. Too many voices, too many permissions, too many interpretations. So she planned against that. Yet the public interpreted structure as favoritism. Why? Because grief distorts logic. Millions felt personally connected to Diana. Her death created a collective sense of loss, and with loss comes entitlement. People felt they had a right to weigh in, to judge, to decide what was fair. But fairness, in Diana's mind, was never about optics. It was about protection. Those closest to her tried, quietly, to correct the narrative. They explained that the arrangement was practical, that it followed legal norms, that it was designed to reduce conflict, not create it. But those explanations rarely went viral. Outrage did. The misconception became emotionally useful. It allowed people to project unresolved feelings about monarchy, about family, about injustice onto a single decision they barely understood. And over time, the myth hardened. Even today, many still believe Diana's estate decision revealed something dark or divisive. In reality, it revealed something deeply maternal: foresight. She anticipated how different lives would require different safeguards. She accepted that public roles come with built-in protections, and private lives do not. And she adjusted accordingly. That's not favoritism, that's awareness. The tragedy isn't the decision itself. The tragedy is how rarely Diana was credited with wisdom instead of drama. Her final arrangements were calm, measured, and rooted in love, not reaction. But because they didn't fit the emotional story the world wanted to tell, they were misunderstood. And once a misconception becomes symbolic, correcting it feels like ruining the story. So the myth lived on until now. Because when you look closely, without projection, without outrage, what emerges isn't controversy. It's clarity. And the quiet intelligence of a woman who knew the world would misunderstand her, and planned anyway. But because of trust, nearly 3 decades after her passing, the shadow of Princess Diana still stretches across the modern monarchy. Not loudly, not dramatically, but powerfully. Her estate decision, once misunderstood, debated, and distorted, continues to influence how her legacy is protected, presented, and preserved. And perhaps the most striking part? It has worked exactly as she intended. By consolidating responsibility rather than dividing it, Diana ensured that her memory would not become fragmented. There would not be competing narratives, public disputes over image rights, or endless commercial exploitation from multiple directions. Instead, there would be structure. That structure has quietly shaped everything from charitable alignments to archival control. It has determined how her personal letters are handled, how her image is licensed, and how public tributes are curated. The stewardship has been deliberate, controlled, and cautious, precisely what she foresaw would be necessary. Because Diana understood something few did at the time. Her legacy would be bigger than her life. The world didn't simply mourn her, it canonized her. Murals, documentaries, biopics, interviews, conspiracy theories. Her story became permanent global currency. And without a central guardian, it could have spiraled into chaos. Instead, it remained largely intact. Of course, that doesn't mean there were no tensions. Public life within the royal family has evolved dramatically over the years. Relationships have been tested. Public narratives have shifted. The monarchy itself has entered periods of scrutiny and transformation. But Diana's estate structure prevented one specific kind of fracture: internal battle over her memory. There has never been a prolonged public fight over her possessions, her intellectual property, or the direction of her charitable influence. And in a family where media attention magnifies every disagreement, that silence is telling. It suggests intention. It suggests foresight. And it suggests that the choice people once questioned may have been one of her most stabilizing decisions. Yet there is an emotional layer that often goes unspoken. By placing the estate's control in specific hands, Diana didn't just assign legal responsibility, she passed down emotional weight. The role of protector of her memory is not ceremonial. It is constant. Every anniversary, every documentary release, every new portrayal requires decisions. What is accurate? What is respectful? What aligns with who she truly was? That burden doesn't fade with time. It evolves, and while the public focuses on dramatic headlines, the real consequence of Diana's choice has been quiet consistency. Her humanitarian identity remains central to how she is remembered. Campaigns she championed, from landmine awareness to HIV/AIDS advocacy, remain part of her narrative. Her image hasn't splintered into conflicting commercial ventures. It hasn't been diluted by competing control. It has remained, remarkably, unified. That unity is not accidental. It is structural. In hindsight, the controversy around just one person feels smaller than it once did. The years have revealed what outrage initially concealed. The arrangement was not about preference. It was about preservation. And perhaps the most profound consequence is this: Diana's voice still feels singular. In an era of constant reinvention and media saturation, her legacy has retained coherence. When people speak of her, they speak of compassion, vulnerability, courage. The narrative hasn't fractured into corporate branding or legal disputes. It has endured. That endurance is her final gift, not drama, not division. But durability. So when people ask why her estate went to one central steward, the real answer isn't shocking. It's simple. She wanted her story protected. And nearly 30 years later, it still is.